children. In this class, we will study the age of Milton. So the age of Milton is a very complex and decisive age in the history of England. It was an age of remarkable paradoxes and contradictions. The age of Milton was in more than one sense an age of transition. So in politics, democratic ideals of human liberty and equality were gradually replacing the age-old doctrine of the divinity of the king. And if you see in religion too, Roman Catholicism was gradually yielding to Protestantism and Puritanism. So England in Milton's age was laboring through such a situation of transition in all national and social spheres. And let us see the general characteristics of the age of John Milton. So I have listed two here. The first one will start with the Civil War. So the entire period was dominated by the Civil War, which divided the people into two factions. So one loyal to the king and the second opposed to him. So the theory of the divine right of kings began to be openly challenged. The king, that is Charles I, and the parliament came into headlong collision. The hostilities, which began in 1642, lasted till the execution of Charles I in 1649. These turbulent years actually saw the establishment of the Commonwealth, the rise of Oliver Cromwell, and the confusion which followed upon his death, and finally the restoration of monarchy in 1660. And if you see, Puritans who were largely responsible for the Civil War and the execution of Charles I came to be arrested and prosecuted in large numbers. When Milton himself was arrested and heavily fined. So Charles II's act of amnesty and oblivion, however, pardoned all the rebels except those who were directly responsible or involved for the murder of Charles I. So Milton saved under this act, that is the act of Charles II. The second is the Puritan movement. That is, the religion and politics were inseparably blended together in England in those momentous years. So the second period or second characteristic of Milton's age is the Puritan movement. So the period between 1625 and 1675 is known as the Puritan age or John Milton's age. So the Renaissance, which exercised immense influence on Elizabethan literature, was essentially pagan and sensuous. It did not concern the moral nature of man, and it brought little relief from the despotism of rulers. So Puritanism actually aimed to make men honest and to make them free. So during the Puritan rule of Cromwell, several laws were passed, simple pleasures were forbidden, theatres were closed, and an austere standard of living was forced upon an unwilling people. So there was rebellion against Puritanism, which ended with the restoration of King Charles. Puritanism is a religious reform movement in the late 16th and 17th centuries that sought to purify the Church of England of remnants of Roman Catholic, so that the Puritans claimed had been retained after the religious settlement, which reached early in the reign of Queen Elizabeth. So religion and, as I said, politics were inseparable during that time. So religion dominated both the national and personal life in the early 17th century. So the intense interest in theological controversy and to some extent in books of devotion was common to almost all ranks of society. So the Puritans, they gave utopian visions of reforms and rebuilding of society, and this actually ended up in commotion or confusion. Third is social reforms. So the zeal for a radical reform, which had its roots in religion, was soon applied to secular concerns, and many aspects of society came under debate. So there was a strong movement for simplifying the complexities of the law. So radical changes in the system of education were invited to advise on educational reforms, and they also demanded agrarian reforms. First, common lands and then private estates were to become common property, but not by violence. So some of the reforms demanded more curiously modern, like women's suffrage and free medical aid for the poor. So in the sphere of women's freedom, civic rights and equality, however, practically, if you see, no reforms were introduced. Okay, so women of the upper and middle classes, they had to look upon their husbands as lords to whom an unquestioning obedience was due. So this explains even Milton's attitude to his first wife and his view of womanhood in general. Right? So the next fourth one is the literary scene. So equally animated was the literary scene in England during those stormy years. So London became the center of all literary and cultural activities. The habit of reading was widespread all over the country. So Milton stood head and shoulders above all authors, both in poetry and prose. So even this Milton's Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Comus and Samson Agonistes constitute the richest legacy the 17th century has left, not only for England but for the whole world. So now John Milton, let us study John Milton now. So if you see, undoubtedly John Milton is regarded as one of the greatest poets in English literature. He is second only to Shakespeare. And as a youth, Milton was very attractive. So also at the college, he was known as the Lady of Christ. So the college is known as the Lady of Christ. He was a highly learned man who had made a thorough study of the Bible at home during his childhood. So this is the image of Paradise Lost. So Milton lived a very moral and pure life. He was a very ambitious man who wanted to write something remarkable which would bring glory to his own country. So in order to fulfill this great aim, he wrote Paradise Lost, which is comparable to almost all the great epic of classical writers. So in Paradise Lost, Milton produced the greatest English poem. So this is Paradise Lost, his masterpiece. In this masterpiece, he revealed his intellectual energy and creative power. The inspiration and the subject matter of the poem come from Milton's Puritanism. It insists on eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men. So now we see this grand style, Milton's grand style. So if you see, to Milton, poetry was not an idle pastime, but a literary expression of the deep and inevitable urge that he felt within himself. So Milton's character and personality may be defined in one word as lofty. So that is a serious-minded man. He did not concern himself with trivialities. So he had the deep-rooted conviction that all his actions were being constantly and carefully observed by his awful taskmaster. That is, we all know, God. So Milton lived a life of dedication. He had dedicated himself to the service of man and God. And the word sublimity in literary style comes from a synthesis of the majestic and the mysterious, and this quality was native to Milton's mind. So Paradise Lost is characterized by a peculiar mightiness of imagery and phrase, and genuinely deserves the epithet sublime. See, Paradise Lost is actually the quintessence of all philosophy, metaphysics, cosmology, religion, and theology. Here is a full display of the united force of study and genius, of a great accumulation of materials with judgment to digest and fancy to combine them. So Milton was able to select from nature or from story or even from ancient fable and also from modern science. So whatever could illustrate or adorn his thoughts, he has selected from everything. An accumulation of knowledge impregnated his mind and fermented by study and exalted by imagination. So Milton's chief talent and indeed his distinguishing excellence actually lies in the sublimity of his thoughts. That's why we say that genuinely he deserves the epithet sublime. So sublime, though not apt to stir up emotion in the mind of the reader, nor consequently so perfect the epic way of writing, but it is filled with less action. So in Paradise Lost, Milton displayed a beautiful blending of sublime thought and sublime expression. So Milton's style possesses grandeur. I believe you'll be familiar with this term, grandeur. Milton's style possesses grandeur and elevation, an account of which it is rightly called the grand style. Okay, because his style possesses grandeur and elevation, so it is rightly called, Milton's style is rightly called grand style. Okay, so Milton actually introduces his grandeur mainly by three things. The first is the use of slightly unfamiliar words and construction in his work, like including archaisms and like celebrated things. Second is the celebrated things, the use of proper names, sounds, celebrated things. And the third is continued allusion to all the sources of heightened interest in our sense and our experience, like light, darkness, flowers, love, etc. All these, overtopped and managed with an air of magnanimous austerity. So it is an account of these devices, the devices that he uses in his poems, that the poet Milton achieves the unremitting manipulation of his readers. This is actually an observation made by C.S. Lewis about Milton. So Milton was a liberal Puritan, and he believed in puritanic austerity, simplicity and faith without being fanatic or narrow-minded or intolerant of other beliefs and creeds. So he was one of the great leaders of Reformation that sought to bring about radical reforms in the religious, social and political life of the people. And for this purpose, he wrote a number of powerful and impressive pamphlets or articles dealing with the great national problems. And he could not separate his poetry from his zeal for reformation. Remaining we'll see next class.